is Battlefleet Gothic Armada 2, which is a real-time strategy game adopted straight from the famous tabletop game that exists in the Warhammer 40k universe. This is a notable game due to the fact that it's A, beautiful, and B, just a fantastic example of space combat in RTS format. I haven't played the original board game, but I can tell you, this version brings so much to the table that you gotta give Battlefleet Gothic Armada 2 a shot. Moving on to 24 is Sid Meier's Civilization VI Gathering Storm, which is the second expansion pack for the turn-based strategy Civilization VI, of course. We get new features, new civilizations, and more importantly, huge natural disasters in the form of floods, rising sea levels, hurricanes, tornadoes, and of course, volcanic eruptions, among others. We'll go ahead and say that there's other things that are improved too, like diplomacy and a number of other systems, but the real attraction, in my opinion, are the natural disasters. It adds another layer to strategy in a game that already has a lot going for it as far as that goes, and Civilization VI Gathering Storm, it just kicks ass, basically. Moving on to 23 is Bloody Spell, which is a Chinese action RPG that's currently available on Steam Early Access. I'm sure it will develop before it comes out in full. However, it's super interesting as it is. It borrows heavily from Dark Souls, however it brings in a layer of Kung Fu, and it changes some of the conventions of the Souls-like genre. For instance, there are no checkpoints, you get one life. Health doesn't automatically regenerate, you have to collect health. And while some of this stuff may not compel you massively, it's also the flagship game from a company that gained prominence in China selling game consoles when you weren't allowed to have Nintendo consoles. And there's a number of actually confusing elements to the story, but it's actually kind of a weirdly promising game, albeit extremely unpolished at the moment. It's definitely worth paying attention to. Bloody Spell is out on Early Access on Steam now. It's weird but cool. Moving on to number 22 is Maelstrom, which is a really cool multiplayer battle royale, kind of an arcadey pirate ship version of that. But it's not just you try to outlast a bunch of ships. There's also these big monsters and natural disasters and things to deal with. Honestly, if you just look at the footage, you should be able to tell how fun this game is. It's one of those games that forgoes a lot of the excuses they try to justify what's going on in the game with, and just gives you this super fun, hey, we came up with a ridiculous concept, let's just do it, type package. It's also free to play and manages to be not obnoxious, which is why you gotta give Maelstrom a shot. It is fun as hell. Moving on to number 21 is Splitgate Arena Warfare, and let me just go ahead and say I'm bringing this up because I really want people to get into this game. It's such a great idea. It's basically Halo multiplayer plus Portal. There you go, you got it. That's what it is. And that makes it, oddly enough, radically different from a lot of other multiplayer shooters, given it adds such a specific strategy aspect to it in the portals. You can do some absolutely wild stuff with those portals, and more people need to get onto this game. I mean, it's got a healthy base, but in every way, it's the kind of game that should be huge. It's also free and in constant development, so give Splitgate Arena Warfare a shot. Moving on to 20 is Green Hell, which is a survival game set in the Amazonian rainforest. As it turns out, the rainforest is not just a pretty place, it's also really hard to survive in. Hence the reason why setting a game here makes sense to call it Green Hell. You have to start fires, manage resources, and build a means to survive. Honestly, it's one hell of a fun game, although it will frustrate you for sure. However, I mean that in a good way. Green Hell is a great game. Coming in at number 19 is Hot Lava, which is also available in Apple Arcade, but I feel it bears mentioning that the game basically is a The Floor is Lava simulator. You run from point A to point B trying to not land on the floor because the floor is lava. As such, you get a collection of courses that are absolutely really enjoyable to run across, jump, parkour, swing, whatever you want to call it. And the game just generates a fantastic frenetic energy. Hot Lava is a hell of a game for 20 bucks and you'll be endlessly amused by it. Moving on to number 18 is Mo Astray, which is a puzzle platformer set in a sci-fi world in which you play Mo, a blob, where you parasitically take over enemies and do a lot of directional jumping and glomming on to stuff. It's very, very cool. It's also gorgeous beyond what you might expect. You'll feel some sense of Celeste here, some sense of the sort of darker platformers as well, even Super Meat Boy in some respects, but it's obviously a lot darker than either of those. However, the variety of enemies and situations you get into make Moe Stray a must-play. Moving on to number 17 is Postal 4. Yes, Postal 4. The open world sandbox, basically chaos/weapons simulator. They added a pacifist option to the game. You can play it without killing people, but I mean, it's Postal. I'm not 100% sure you will, but it really does a good job bringing the sort of absurdity of Postal to a situation where there's better physics, more possibilities for weapons, etc. And I gotta say, Postal 4 is actually really good. Coming in at number 16 is Pacify, a horror game in which you're hired to investigate a house which the owners want to put up for sale. However, there is a quote-unquote evil inside. That evil comes in the form of a little girl ghost that roams around and goes between good and evil. You, of course, have to pacify the evil so that she is good, so that you can gradually try to escape the house. This is a game that actually does a really good job with its concept. It's a one-person developer and yet manages to be a hell of an experience, either single or multiplayer. And for $5, you really just can't go wrong with Pacify, honestly. Moving on to 15 is Dota Underlords, which is essentially the official version of Dota Auto Chess, and actually came after Valve met with the developers of Auto Chess, and they came to a conclusion rather than bringing on Auto Chess as a Valve product, instead making both products. However, Dota Auto Chess probably is a little bit more accessible for somebody who doesn't really understand what the genre actually is. It's a good take on it that continues to add new features as well. For instance, it recently added a jail that is actually a good idea and fun, and it's free, so if you want to try the auto chess genre, this is the place to start. Moving on to number 14, Foundation is a really fun, gridless medieval city builder that I think its strength and unique selling point is the fact that it is gridless. Medieval cities weren't built on a grid, they were built basically however they could be built. In this game, you're managing production chains, you're managing the actual development of the city, the building of a castle, and honestly, not only does it have kind of a cool, simplistic graphic style, it's also actually kind of pretty as well. I would call Foundation something cool and different in the city builder genre, one that really does need something cool and different from time to time. Moving on to 13, we actually have other city builder stuff to talk about here as well, in the form of Islanders, which is a minimalist city builder that operates instead of on a resource management system, instead on a points and inventory system. You build something, you get points. It's context sensitive, so building a timber factory near wood gets you more points than just building it in the middle of nowhere. And when you get more points, you get more buildings, your inventory is refilled, etc., etc. Again, it's something very different in a genre that I feel needs some different stuff in it now, and Islanders just kind of kills it. It's great. It's also only $5, so give it a shot. Number 12 is Undefeated, and I have to say this is one of my favorite releases this year, period. It's a ridiculous superhero simulator in which you can cause so much chaos and havoc. It is bizarre, absurd, fun as hell. You can kind of call it a sandbox superhero game, but it's also basically what would you do if you were Superman and could do whatever you want without consequence, because that's actually what Superman does. Undefeated was also only made by 3 people, and it's phenomenal, and you have to play it. It's free, and I mean that. You have to play it. Moving on to number 11 is MechWarrior 5. It has been a long time. MechWarrior 4 came out in the year 2000, and honestly, I want to be piloting mechs. That's what I want. I've wanted that for a long time. The real world is not going to provide me with that, and therefore I played all 4 of the MechWarrior games. I'm so ready to play the 5th. If you're keeping track, the game takes place during the last decade of the Third Succession War, but you don't need to know anything about that for MechWarrior to be fun. It's a unique game where mechs have definitely their own feel as far as controls go, and in some respects it even comes off a little simulation-ish. And I'm excited to see how MechWarrior 5 Mercenaries lands when it comes out December 10th. Moving on to number 10 is Age of Empires 2 Definitive Edition, which, just like Age of Empires Definitive Edition, brings the original game up to 4K, remasters the graphics and effects, and gives you much better artificial intelligence that, well, doesn't cheat. Age of Empires is obviously a game that rightfully has a place in a lot of people's hearts, and it's nice to see it at 4K. Age of Empires 2 Definitive Edition is great. Coming in at number 9 is Noita, which is a magical action roguelite platformer in which every pixel is physically simulated. It's important to note this because you can interact in the environment in a way that you absolutely never see in games like this. You can destroy just about everything. You can interact with most materials, if not all materials. Like for instance, you can chip rock off of the ceiling and have it fall on an enemy. You can ignite gas on fire. You can pour water on lava and make a platform. It's just cool as hell in every possible way. You have to play it to believe it. Noita is out. People love this game and they have a good reason for it. Coming in at number 8 is Disco Elysium, a detective RPG as it calls itself, and it would be difficult to overstate just how cool this game is. It has a very specific aesthetic, has a very specific open world, where you have to find out what happened to a man who was found hanging. Honestly, it's just something different and super ambitious that's fairly hard to describe in a 30-second segment. But it is one of the most immersive RPGs I've ever played, and I have to heavily recommend it. I haven't beaten it yet, but I will say it's just something different that you gotta look at. Disco Elysium is out now, give it a shot. At number 7 is Autonauts, a game where you colonize uninhabited planets and essentially build a very cute little empire where you progress through the ages with new technologies, new generational things, etc. It's a game that manages not to be difficult. It's very simple to pick up and play. However, it's very, very deep while also being colorful, cute, and really enjoyable to dive into. Autonauts is worth every cent of the $20 it costs. Moving on to number 6 is Hell Let Loose, a first-person shooter set in World War II, in which open battles of 100 players go against each other with, yes, not just infantry, but tanks and various artillery. It's currently out in early access. And no, it's not a battle royale, it's a 50 versus 50 World War II battler. It's also not a Battlefield clone. It has its own feel to it, and that's great. For an early access game, it's pretty far along too, and I would say I highly recommend giving Hell Let Loose a shot. Coming in at number 5 is Planet Zoo, the spiritual successor to Zoo Tycoon, however, is a lot more advanced, especially with animal AI, and basically gives you the options to build a zoo, maintain it, get up close with animals, and actually learn a lot. And I wouldn't say that just with children either. I think that an adult playing this game will learn things that they don't know as well. It's also fun, just plain fun. It comes to us from the developer that did all the Tycoon games, and all of that experience is completely obvious in Planet Zoo. Coming in at number 4 is Oxygen Not Included, a space colony simulation game that in some respects will remind you of Fallout Shelter, however, in others will not. It's very much about managing resources, which are very scarce, developing scientific research, and overall improving the lives of the people in your space colony. It also has a welcoming art style and its own very quirky humor. In a lot of ways, it reminds me of games from the Behemoth, but with very different focus. Oxygen Not Included is fun as hell, go check it out. Coming in at number 3 is Anno 1800, which is single-handedly the game that made PC the biggest platform for Ubisoft. Anno 1800 is a real-time strategy city builder. It's probably coolest because the whole point of the game is grappling with industrialization, and that is just a fascinating time for the world. And it does a really fantastic job of that. Probably the best of any game I've played, especially a city builder. And you can do this through a story campaign, there's a sandbox mode, and there's also multiplayer. It's one of those games that gives you a lot of options and a lot of replay value, so I'd highly recommend Anno 1800. Coming in at number 2 is Mordhau, a game that really does a cool job being what it is. It's a very detailed combat simulator as far as melee combat in a medieval setting, and is one of those games that you can just easily jump right into, but it's very difficult to master. And let me just go ahead and say that without a lot of practice, you're not going to win any matches. It absolutely just does a ton right, though. If you haven't, you gotta try out Mordhau now. It's one of the coolest titles of the year. And finally at number 1 is Total War 3 Kingdoms. Now, it's Total War, set between the year 220 and the year 280, the Three Kingdoms period of China's history. There's 2 versions of it, Romance, which is based on the novel Romance of the Three Kingdoms, and Records, which, as you might guess, is based on Records of the Three Kingdoms and is more historically authentic. The best thing you can say from here is that it is a total war game. All of the shorthand for the phenomenal turn-based strategy that it is, I am intending to put into that statement. It is the sum of all of the experience Creative Assembly has amassed making the Total War series, and Total War 3 Kingdoms is a masterpiece. Couple of quick bonus games for you. First, Touhou Luna Nights, which is a 2D search action game set up like a Metroidvania. It gives me Legend of the Mystical Ninja vibes, however it's infinitely more complex gameplay wise and has great graphics. Next is Steel Division 2, a real-time strategy game set during Operation Bagration. It's the sequel to Steel Division Normandy 44 and builds on the original in almost every way. Next is GTFO, a 4-player horror action cooperative game that in some respects looks a little bit like Left 4 Dead, but in others looks a little bit more involved. It's 4-player PvE set in an underground research facility that's been overrun with monsters. It's got perhaps the best possible aesthetic for this type of a thing. And finally, a game that is currently PC exclusive but will be going to consoles at some point is Phoenix Point, which is a strategy